So again, my name is Terry Bearb, and I'm going to go ahead and walk you guys through an exploratory spatial analysis of college football recruiting in the Southeastern Conference from 2015 to 2019. So for my objectives, I'm going to first present my research question. I'm going to show an overview map analysis. Now I'm then going to show a university map analysis. I'm going to show my visualization survey results and then finish with my conclusion. All right, for my research question. So as spatial relationships between a recruit and the university they commit to are analyzed and mapped, which thematic mapping method is preferred for displaying spatial patterns and recruiting tendencies? And are there any significant spatial relationships between SEC recruiting and the Southeastern United States? So for my data collection, I use NCAA football recruiting data. This came in the form of 5 different CSV files, and it was found via a 24/7 sports recruiting database. I use NFL draft data as a supplementary analysis here, and this also came in the form of CSV files and was found via a GitHub repository. And then for my United States Polygon feature class, I use Living Atlas from ArcGIS Pro. All right, now for my methods, I broke it down to 3 different sections. This first section is conversion, and that consisted of just downloading the CSV data, both the player rankings and NFL draft data, massaging the data, and then pushing it over to ArcGIS Pro as geodatabase tables. I then used the geocode tool to transform the data that was in the CSV files to actual data points on the map. And that was used using the high school city field. And then use data joins and merges. So the data join was used to join the player rankings data to the NFL draft data. And the merge was used to join the 5 different Polygon feature classes to a single feature class. And for the analysis section, that consisted of using 4 different spatial analysis tools. So summarize within, mean center, Euclidean distance, and directional distribution. And here in the evaluation phase, that consisted of generating these 4 different thematic maps, analyzing those results, and then creating a visualization survey to analyze those results as well based off the maps. All right, for my study area, that consisted of the United States by and large, but what we're really going to focus on here is just the Southeast and really the extent that we see here inside this frame. And the 14 different points you see on the map just represent the actual SEC campus locations as well. All right, now for an overview map analysis. So here we're going to be looking at the 1,536 recruits that committed to an SEC school in that 5-year span. So the first map here is going to be a Corpleth map. It's just made by the Summarize Within tool that takes account of all the points within the bounds of each state. And as we can see here, there's very dense recruitment here in the Southeast. That's indicated by both the numbers you see inside the polygon as well as the colors on the map. So as it gets higher, the colors get darker as well. And we can see as we navigate from the Southeast, those numbers decline drastically. Just overall, we see that the state of Georgia had the most at 259 athletes. Here we're looking at a different kind of map. It's kind of a chaotic map, but I think it's also meaningful. It's just a different way to show the recruit dispersion. So each of the 14 schools here are represented by a standard deviational ellipse. And what that does is basically just summarizes the recruit directional trends in the 5-year span. And what I ended up doing was applying a slight transparency to each of these different ellipses. So as they continue to overlap, you can see kind of towards the center where the mean center is, it gets kind of hazy, just kind of indicating that there's actual dense recruitment in this area here. And then in this map, we're not really focusing on specifically where the campuses are located, but more so where the recruiting mean centers for the 5 years for each of the schools. So where are they plotting on this map here? And what we can see here is that they're mostly kind of congregated in a single area, but specifically in these 3 states, we have the bulk of the recruiting mean centers here. All right, now for a university map analysis. So here I'm going to present 4 different mapping examples. And what I did here was actually create 56 different maps. So it was 4 different thematic maps for each of the 14 schools. All right, so this first one here is Corpleth. And again, it was done with the Summarize Within tool. And these are excellent maps for showing the in-state versus the out-of-state recruiting percentages. And as we can see, as the numbers within the state get higher, the colors on the map also get darker. And just as in this example for Texas A&M University, we can see that, overall their out-of-state recruiting percentages were lower. So. And then for the graduated symbol map, these were used by symbolizing the point data by graduated points here by the star rating. And what the star rating is just a numerical value that the high school athlete receives in high school. And the higher the number, the greater caliber athlete they are. So as you can see here, the highest point on the map is 5, indicating the highest rated athlete. And these maps are not only great for showing where that dispersion is across the United States, but more specifically showing where those higher caliber athletes are coming from. All right, for the heat map, these are great maps for the map reader to just quickly interpret where that dense and sparse recruitment is really coming from. And then here for the heat map for LSU, we can see that the densest recruitment was immediately right in the area where the actual campus is located. And for the map overlay, we're looking at really 4 different things here. So one being the university symbol, which represents the campus location. We have the mean center for the 5 years. We have a standard deviational ellipse on the map, which is made by the directional distribution tool. And again, just takes a summary really of where the recruit directional trends were occurring for the 5-year span. And then this last gray window here with the rings and circles here is just basically the extent of all the recruits in that time frame and its relation to the campus. Now we're going to just show some quick results of each of the different types of maps. First is choropleth. We can see that the University of Kentucky and Vanderbilt University had the overall highest out-of-state recruiting percentages at both 86% and 83%. Texas A&M University and the University of Florida had the overall lowest at 30 and 39%. And then the state of Georgia, by and large, it played the biggest role in the SEC recruitment. If you remember on the overview map, there was 259 athletes total that came from the state of Georgia. And then just kind of by and large, if it was essentially the biggest influencer for the other 13 schools whenever they sought out-of-state recruits as well. All right, for the graduated symbols, we saw that the University of Alabama had the overall highest number at 20 athletes in the 5-year span. University of Kentucky and Vanderbilt University weren't able to recruit any 5-star athletes in that time frame. There were 78 total 5-star recruits to the SEC. That was 20 from Alabama, 20 that committed to Alabama, and 19 that committed to Georgia. And then we had 532 4-star recruits that committed to the SEC. The highest was 77 to Alabama, 63 to Georgia, and 61 to LSU. For the heat map results, we can see that the state of Mississippi was the single largest area when it came to recruit density. So what we had here was specifically looking at the University of Mississippi as well as Mississippi State University. Practically in those maps, the entire state was regarded as dense recruitment. For the University of Missouri, it was really the only one out of the 14 schools that focused their recruitment on metropolitan areas. The others seemed to focus more so on a single geographic area. And then we had half of the schools, so 7 out of 14 had their dense recruitment occur near their campus location. All right, for the map overlay results, Vanderbilt University and the University of Alabama had the overall largest standard deviational ellipses for the 5 years. University of South Carolina and Louisiana State University had the overall smallest. Mississippi State University and Auburn University had their recruiting mean centers sit closest to their campus locations. And the University of Missouri had their recruiting mean center furthest away from their campus location. Okay, now for some visualization survey results. We had a total of 73 participants that were in the survey, we had 48 males and 25 females. Largest age group was 19 to 34, and the vision deficiency, we only had 8% that had a known vision deficiency. We had 25 out of 73 that were very familiar with cartography, and 17 out of 73 that were slightly familiar with college football. Here we're looking at the 4 different thematic maps and how each survey taker did in answering questions about those maps. Here represented in the color of gray is the percentage of scores that it indicates that the participant got all the questions answered correctly. So we can see that the heat map had the overall highest at 93%. The overall lowest came from the graduated symbols map at 11%. And the most variation in answers came from the Coreplex maps. Here we're looking at the map interpretation as well as map aesthetics. And we're really only going to focus on the heat map and the graduated symbols map, which were the highest and lowest percentage of scores. We can see that 55 strongly agreed that the heat maps were easy to interpret, and 46 strongly agreed that they were also aesthetically pleasing. We had 27 somewhat agree that the graduated symbols maps were easy to interpret, and 22 somewhat agree and somewhat disagree that they were also aesthetically pleasing. And the interesting thing here to note is that what I noticed is as these numbers go up for interpretation, they also tend to kind of go up for the aesthetically pleasing as well. And then for the average visualization results, I asked the survey taker to rate the following items from 1 to 100, with 100 being the highest. And the categories were appropriate mapping method, map interpretation, and use of color. We can see that the overall highest score was from the appropriate mapping method being used at 86%, then followed by use of color and map interpretation. In terms of overall mapping preference, we had 38 out of 73 that overall preferred the heat map over the others in terms of displaying that recruitment dispersion. All right, and now for the conclusion here. So which map was deemed best for displaying the spatial patterns and recruiting tendencies? I think it's definitely been indicated by the heat map just based off of these 4 different categories here. So we had 93% of the participants get all the answers answered correctly for this map. 75% of the participants thought that it was easiest to interpret. 63% thought that it was aesthetically pleasing. And 52% overall preferred this map over the others. And then in terms of spatial relationships between SEC recruiting in the Southeast, we saw that there was dense recruitment for all 14 schools in the Southeast. Of course, some were more than others, but and the dense recruitment was prevalent in the Southeast, and it didn't really matter which year that we were looking at in the 5-year span. In terms of the mean centers again for all the 14 schools, we had 10 out of 14, or just over 71% of those recruiting mean centers sit within the bounds of Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia. So that just kind of goes to show you, where that real dense recruitment is really coming from. And then for the state of Georgia, by and large, again, it played the biggest role in the SEC recruitment, with 259 athletes coming out of it. And again, it was the biggest influencer for the other schools when it came for them seeking out-of-state recruits as well. In terms of limitations here, there was one main one in terms of the actual project. And what that was whenever I used the geocode tool, I originally wanted to use the high school address to get more accurate data points here. But since that information wasn't readily available, I unfortunately had to just settle for the high school city, which explains why some of the points will sit on top of each other on the map itself. And then for future studies, I think there's a couple things we can look at here. So one is time alteration. I did my study on a 5-year span, but this can definitely be repeated for more or less years. It can be used in other NCAA conferences. So for example, the same methods could be applied to the Big Ten or Pac-12 to just view where their recruit dispersion is also coming from. And then, instead of focusing on all 14 schools in a conference, it can also just be used on a single school within the conference to really focus in on where that dispersion is for that single school. And then lastly, as a comparative analysis, it can be used for other SEC sports. So as an example, we saw that there was really dense recruitment in the Southeast for SEC football, but if we look at SEC basketball, is the dispersion maybe more so in the Northeast, or is it more so maybe further west in the United States? And that is it.